Hey, 5th and 6th graders, here is another chapter in Inkling, Chapter 6. Chapter 6. At night, when everyone was asleep, Inkling explored some more. Along the shadowed hallway, he slid curiously, keeping an eye out for Rickman, who also kept night hours. To Inkling, the entire house smelled of ink and paper, especially the studio at the end of the hall. Was what he was really searching for in there? During the day, Inkling avoided that room and Mr. Reliance. The sketchbook was there, and Inkling hated that sketchbook. It wanted to drag him back in. It was angry and sad, and Inkling sensed Mr. Reliance was angry and sad too. Still, the studio tugged at him. He was getting closer when Rickman stepped out through the doorway and paused, ears pricked. Inkling shrank back against the baseboard. He feared that fiendish cat almost as much as the sketchbook. He hated the way his sharp claws could pierce him, and even though Inkling could just flow around them, the little rips healed instantly. They still caused him pain. Rickman sniffed the air. Inkling quickly retreated and slipped over to the nearest room. He didn't want to stay too near to the door in case the cat came in, so he moved closer to the bed. Mr. Reliance was snoring. He moved around the clothes, dumped on the floor, and climbed the leg of the night table. On top was a phone, a book, and a tumbler that held the sticky remnants of strong-smelling liquid. Mr. Reliance turned over in his sleep, bringing his face within inches of the night table. Inkling was startled to find himself suddenly drawing. He didn't seem to have any control over it. One of his inky tendrils was frantically sketching on the table, faces, rooms, everyday things, all so quickly that he was drawing one thing over the other, as if trying to keep up with what? He realized he must somehow be seeing Mr. Reliance's dreams, except that he wasn't even seeing them. He was just drawing whatever was circling around in Mr. Reliance's sleepy head. And for the first time, Inkling understood that he hadn't just come from Mr. Reliance's sketchbook. He had come from Mr. Reliance himself. How else could he be frantically sketching his dreams? And suddenly, there was a bed. This was important, more so than all the things he'd already sketched. Why was it so familiar? Yes, he'd drawn a bit of it, the time when he'd been doodling and Ethan had walked in and seen him. It was an unusual bed, with high sides and a railing around it. It had green blanket and nasty color over it, and the edges of wrinkles. It was clear there was something lying underneath. Inkling stayed very still, concentrating, hoping for more of the picture to come. But at that moment, Rickman jumped on the bottom of the bed, and glared right at Inkling. Fast, Inkling erased his drawing, slid down the carpet, and he made a dash for the door. Behind him, he heard Rickman land heavy. Into the hallway, Inkling bolted and pressed himself flat against the baseboard. He knew he had a few seconds and shaped himself into a dish, same as the one he'd seen Rickman eating from. Rickman emerged from the room, his eyes locked onto the dish against the wall. His dish was never there, and yet it was undeniably a dish, and in the dish there was usually food. He forgot about the hunt and paddled over towards the dish. Inkling watched him come closer. Over the past couple of days, he'd done a lot of reading, and one of the things he learned was that cats were most afraid of. And when Rickman was just a few inches away, Inkling swirled himself into the shape of a cobra and sprang like something from a jack-in-the-box. Rickman lifted straight up off the floor, ricocheting off the wall, and hurled himself down the hallway into the kitchen. Inkling formed himself into a happy face on the wall and jiggled about a bit. That was very satisfying, but he was tired now. He slid back to Ethan's room. Underneath the bed, he found a blank piece of newsprint and sketched the image from Peter Reliance's dream. Afterwards, he found a copy of Anne of Green Gables and settled comfortably among the pages. As he erased the words, it wasn't because he was hungry anymore. He just wanted to read. It was the pure enjoyment of being told a story before bedtime. He read many pages, each one more slower than the last, before he finally slowed to a halt and was still. Ethan woke up to the flashlight shining directly into his eyes and a small hand joggling his shoulder. "She is sorry to disturb you," Sarah whispered. "What are you doing?" Ethan said, pushing the flashlight to one side. "Are you awake, Ethan?" "I am now." "Where is Lucy?" With a sigh, Ethan sat up and looked at his bedside clock. It wasn't so bad. His alarm was going to go off in 10 minutes anyway. From underneath the bed, Inkling bounded out in the shape of a puppy. "Lucy," said Sarah, "you come back. We was so worried about you." Inkling paraded around the floor, and Sarah giggled with delight, and a speech bubble appeared from his mouth, and inside the word was woof. "She says woof!" exclaimed Sarah. "She is very clever puppy." "She sure is," Ethan agreed. No one saw Rickman enter Ethan's room. Rickman was not the smartest cat in the world, but he was fairly sure that Inkling puppy on the floor was somehow connected to the inky thing that had scared the Halfin to death last night. Now he wanted revenge. He wanted to catch something just in his life. He prowled closer, and then he pounced. The moment Rickman's claws sank into Inkling, the puppy collapsed into a small, terrified blob. Inkling poured around Rickman's claws and bolted out across the room. Rickman pounced again, but missed. By this time, Inkling was out into the hallway. "Inkling!" hollered Sarah. "You naughty cat! You've hurt Lucy!" Ethan dashed after the cat and scooped him up, and Rickman twisted for a few seconds and even showed his teeth. But Ethan looked stern and puffed up in him, and the cat eventually went boneless. It wasn't worth all this effort. He was old after all. Food didn't have to be so much work. Maybe he'd try again when he'd have a better chance. Ethan looked around the hallway but couldn't see Inkling anywhere. "Inkling!" he called softly. "Lucy!" Sarah shouted. Obviously, Inkling was scared enough to go into hiding for a while, but Ethan wasn't happy. What if it decided to make an appearance in front of Dad? And as if on clue, Dad, zombie, walked into the hallway. "So, all right, let's," he said, and then he disappeared into the washroom. As Ethan got dressed, he checked in the most likely places for Inkling without luck. There was nothing he could do right now. He had to help Sarah pick out her clothes, which took a long time because she had very strong opinions about her wardrobe, and then she had to start the coffee machine going and set the table for breakfast. Mom had never asked him to do all these things, but Dad expected him to help more. He looked around the hallway one last time, but still no sign of Inkling. Ethan figured he'd just have to hope Inkling stay hidden. When Mrs. D left the classroom during their work period, Vika walked over to Ethan's table and stood with her hands on her hips, gazing at their new spread. Pino was coloring some of the panels, and Brady was inking the letters, more neatly than anyone had expected. "Pretty good work," said Vika, nodding. Ethan looked at her carefully, not sure whether she was being sincere. "You guys should have a look at this," Vika said to the class. "It's amazing." "Thanks," said Brady, who liked everyone, including Vika. Ethan started to feel nervous. Heather Lee and a bunch of the other kids came over to have a closer look. "But you know what's weird," said Vika pleasantly. "I've never seen Ethan actually draw anything in this classroom, not a single thing." "He works better at home," Soren said. "True," said Ethan, feeling a little sweaty. "Makes me wonder if you work at all," she said. "Get lost, Vika," Ethan retorted, but he watched her nervously, especially her right leg, the same leg that had tornado kicked him into the garage can. "And look," Vika said, "you don't even have any ink on your fingers." She held up her own hand so everyone could see the smudges. "If you draw, you get inky." "Maybe I just wash my hands better than you," Ethan retorted, and some kids laughed. Vika was right, though. His fingers were totally unstained. His dad never was this clean. He should have thought of that and dabbed some marker on them. Vika just smiled at her friend Sandra and said, "I told you," and the two girls shared a knowing smirk. Ethan looked around at his classmates and Heather. They were all watching him. Did they think his father had done the artwork? He wanted to erase that smirk on Vika's face. "You want to see me draw?" he said rashly. "Ethan," said Soren, putting a nervous hand on his shoulder, "she's not the boss of you. You don't need to." "No, let's do it," said Ethan, glaring at Vika. "Awesome," said Vika, and she slapped a blank piece of paper down in front of him. "Go for it." Ethan grabbed his fine-tip black marker. He'd been watching Inkling draw the gorilla character over and over. He could probably do a pretty good copy. But when he uncapped his marker and touched the point to the paper, he realized how much trouble he was in. What was he doing? He couldn't draw anything. Okay, 5th and 6th graders, that's the first half of Chapter 6. Here's your question. Boy, Vika has put Ethan in a sticky spot. Do you think he's going to try to draw the gorilla as good as Inkling? Or do you think he's going to make a really quick excuse and try to get out of this bad situation? Let me know. Bye-bye now.